he knows some people on our team. Obviously, he's been very vocal about wanting to play with Francisco, which he'll get an opportunity to do at some point when Francisco's back playing for us. But we just think this really makes our team pretty deep and versatile. So we're excited to have him. Trevor Williams provides us with some needed pitching depth. He's been optioned to AAA right now, but I told him he's definitely going to be a part of what we're trying to do here, which is to try to move forward and win a championship. So we feel like we addressed our pitching depth and some of our position player versatility. It was difficult for us to trade Pete Crow-Armstrong, a player that was obviously a high draft pick for us and someone we've cared about and really valued highly. And so that was tough, but we felt like this was the right thing to do for the 2021 New York Mets.
Thank you, Zach. You'll see we have mics on each side of the room. If you'll please raise your hand, a mic will be brought to you, and then identify yourself with your name and affiliation. We'll begin. Steve, right there in front, please.
Thanks. Steve Gelbs, SNY. This is really for either one of you, but clearly there were a number of dynamic bats out there on the market. Why did you zero in on Baez? Why was he the right player for this team?
Sure, a few reasons. One, obviously Francisco's injured right now, which opens up more of an opportunity to play his natural position. So, as I've said before to you guys, we like a lot of our position players. So when we're looking at possible trades for bats, we're looking at how they change our team relative to the guys we have, who we think are good players. So, Javi gets the edge over maybe some other guys because he fits a direct positional need right now, and with Francisco being out for a little while. But he also is excited to move around, and as he's said publicly even before coming here, that he'd be willing to move around the diamond, and so he provides that versatility that I've also talked about when Francisco does return and takes over at shortstop. So that's why he fit really well.
You mentioned how he had spoken about wanting to play with Francisco. Obviously, Francisco is very excited to have him here as well. How much conversation did you have with Francisco just to, I guess, get his take on the player, the person, and what he would add?
Yeah, I think there was some conversation with Francisco, and that would be natural for any player that has knowledge of someone we're attempting to acquire, particularly in this case because so much of, I think, our team success has been built on team chemistry, and that's something that's important to us. So there was some discussion, but it certainly wasn't anything out of the ordinary. In fact, if other players had some, opinion or experience, we would have consulted them as well. So, it's all part of the process. And I will say that just talking about the process, so I've really been more of an observer over the last 4 or 5 days than an active participant. But, based on my prior experience, I thought that this deadline was handled extremely well. We had lots of people involved, both on the analytics side and the scouting side. Great collaboration, and something that we've been trying to achieve, which is to get people involved, voice their opinions, without reservation, and then try to make a decision. I think Zach was great at eliciting that input and then distilling it down in a smaller group in order to try to reach a decision. It's not easy for us to give up prospects, but in this particular case, when you're a few games ahead in the division on roughly August 1st, we need to do something, and not only to improve the team, but to demonstrate to the players that we had their back and were attempting to make the team better for the next 60 games. With respect to, Baez versus other bats, keep in mind this is a two-way process. And so it's not as if you have access to every player and get to go through a menu of possibilities. But we were happy with the options that we had. It's just that those are not unlimited.
Tim Healy from Newsday. Zach, around 2:45, 3 o'clock, reports started to come out about the deal. and you came out and talked to Francisco on the field while he was doing infield stuff. What did you tell him exactly, and what was his reaction?
Well, I actually was talking to him about something else. We had already agreed to this deal, so that wasn't related to that. I know there was some of you were interested and saw me doing that, but it really wasn't related to this deal. So,
And
we had already talked to him. I mean, Sandy and I called Francisco earlier today to talk through it. You know, I had already talked to Louis, and Louis had talked to Francisco. So we had already talked to him, being someone that's close with Javi before that. So that wasn't about that. That was about something else.
and how close were you on other potential deals for starters or relievers, and why did you ultimately not go in that direction?
Well, kind of as Sandy alluded to, it's also, you know, there's another party involved, and sometimes they see players in a different light. They see players that they may want elsewhere, may value more than the ones that we have, and so you can't control that. We definitely tried and explored a lot of different things. So, you know, we just didn't match up on everything, but we tried several things. We did bring in, like I said, depth pitching. I think, you know, you didn't see many probably top of the rotation type pitchers move. You know, and one of them, as I said to you guys the other day, wasn't, you know, or I've said publicly, it wasn't happening because of the amount of control he had over his landing spot. So, you know, and then it's really up to the teams that these teams are the people that work for these other teams are smart people. They're looking very strategically at how they are going to sell their assets and get the most out of them, and they control things, and you're trying to meet their prices, but they might, even if you meet it, sometimes they go elsewhere.
Thank you.
Tony?
Hey guys, Anthony DeComo, MLB.com. You mentioned Baez being excited about the idea of moving around. Do you see him, once Lindor is back, primarily at one position, or if not, is he the type of guy who could conceivably play 4 different positions in 4 days? Would you put him in the outfield, things like that?
Well, we'll wait till he gets here, and Louis will, you know, have a conversation. Obviously, for right now, he'll be our primary shortstop while Francisco's out, and so there's plenty of time to have that dialogue and feel things out for what makes the most sense with the roster. And especially this year, as you know, as time goes by, things change pretty quickly in terms of availability of different players on the roster. So I'm not saying there's anything there. There might be, though. Everything seems to change daily around here this year. So for right now, though, we know where he's going to be.
And also for either of you, maybe Sandy, it makes sense for you. This was maybe one of the craziest deadlines in recent memory across the game. What factors do you think went into that? Why was that the case this year?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, I would say it was different in several respects. One was the number of teams actively seeking to improve, and I think that's a great sign for baseball. You know, in years past, teams maybe have been looking at a wild card spot, you know, one game in or out, and not really been motivated to improve, hoping that they can get there, but not really investing in the possibility of a wild card. I think some of the races are close enough that there's been broader motivation among clubs, and I think that's a great thing. From a seller's standpoint, that's a good thing. From a buyer's standpoint, probably not, because the more buyers in the market, you know, the higher the prices. And I think that that's what's surprised me this year is the amount of talent that was moved for, you know, relatively short-term potential free agent type assets. You look at some of the clubs that gave up, you know, their second or third best prospect together to get a particular player. And I think this goes back to the question of, you know, pitching and relief pitching. And, you know, Steve and the organization, I think, stated months ago that this was about sustaining success. And so we had to balance, as one always does, the present with the future. And we gave up a really good prospect, but we weren't prepared to sell the farm in order to acquire some of the players who may or may not have been available to us even at those prices. But I was impressed by the fact that a lot more teams were involved, and surprised that you know, the prices were high and they didn't come down, as typically happens closer to the deadline.
Good. Mike on the right.
Mike Puma, New York Post. For Zach or Sandy, just how much did the luxury tax threshold come into play as you considered deals?
You know, it actually wasn't something that was a major issue. I think one thing that was interesting about the sellers were several teams, you know, I think probably because you had teams like, there were several teams around the luxury tax threshold that were buyers. And so I think some of the sellers took the strategy of saying, you know, we'll make that work for you. It's all about getting the talent. They didn't want that to be an obstacle, which I think is a pretty good approach to get the maximum talent. I recall when we, in Boston, when we traded Manny Ramirez, we basically knew he made a lot of money and that it would limit his market, so we pretty much broadcasted to other teams that we'll pay all his money down because we want to get as many bidders as possible so we can get the best possible deal for the Red Sox. So I saw some teams doing similar tactics with multiple teams. You saw players getting paid down to go to different teams, and I thought that made sense for them to do that. So it wasn't really much of a factor at all. They made it pretty easy for us from that standpoint.
Also, how involved did Steve Cohen get in the last few days?
I mean, I had conversations with Steve every day, phone calls, a couple times a day, just to give updates. You know, you want to know what's going on, we talk about it. He was very supportive of whatever it was that we wanted to do. And, you know, he just wanted to be in the loop on what kind of options that we had. So I appreciated his support through the whole process. It was good.
Ken on the left. Dave, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
That's all right. Dave London from Newsday. Just with getting Baez closer towards the end of the deadline, was he a guy that you guys had identified from the jump that you wanted to focus on, or did you kind of explore some other things first and kind of circled back to him, or how did that process go based on some of your other needs, like were mentioned with starting pitching and bullpen?
Sure. I mean, we were casting a wide net, exploring a lot of different things. He was always someone that seemed to be a good fit for us. There were other players too that were good fits for us. So it's really, as we said earlier, it's about, you know, finding that partner where you have some overlap in kind of how they're viewing things, and that's how you match up. I mean, it's really those circumstances that drive a lot of this. You spend a lot of the early days of this week kind of figuring out how to narrow your focus. You know, who are we going to match up with? Who likes our players that we may be willing to trade? You know, how are they looking at it? Because again, that's the first thing. You need to see how they're looking at it, and then if we can get them to give us a price, then we can make a decision on it. And through that process, you end up taking a large field of players, as was mentioned. A lot of players moved, but by gathering information and having a lot of conversations, we can narrow that down and really drill down and focus on what makes the most sense for the Mets.
You know, I would just add that, you know, just over the last week or so, Zach was quoted as saying, you know, we were looking at pitching. Well, we ended up with a pitcher that we optioned to AAA for the time being. You have to look at the pitching market not as something generic, but top end, middle, bottom. And, you know, some of the top end pitching just wasn't available to us. Some players had no trade clauses and didn't want to perhaps come to New York. In other cases, top-end starters were kept off the market until the very last minute and then exacted a very high price. So as you look at the pitching market, top to bottom, you really have to, you know, judge what any particular acquisition in that area will do for your team overall versus what we can do someplace else. And I think what we concluded was that what was available to us at a price that allowed us to, you know, stick with our long-term plan, if you will, we were just better off going in a different direction.
And just, you guys alluded to this earlier, in the case of just Baez, as aside from the numbers part, it seems like the energy part and the relationship he has here with Lindor, I mean, it seems like you guys think he can bring something extra, whether it's continuing the momentum you have or maybe even add something along those lines beyond the numbers.
Yeah, no, besides what he brings to the field, I think there is there are some extra things that he has that make him unique. He's played in an environment where there's expectations to win. He's won. He brings it every day, energy-wise. He's not going to back down from this kind of market. He's going to thrive in it, I think, if anything. I mean, this guy, from everything I've heard, he's fearless and wants nothing more than he wants to win. That's the most important thing. So I think he fits really well with our current clubhouse, and he's an exciting, dynamic player.
Justin in the middle.
Justin Toscano, Bergen Record. For either of you guys, how did your trade deadline haul that you ended up with compare to what you felt would be your ideal haul at the beginning of the week, or even going back to Rich Hill?
Well, I would say this, that we explored a lot of things, and some that involved, much bigger deals, multiple players. But that's where market forces come into play. And so, for example, if a team is talking to you about a 3-player deal, but they think they can split those players up and get more individually from 3 different teams, that's the approach they're going to take. So I think, we faced some of that, as all teams did. So I'm not sure that, we had any real expectations about an ideal trade. I don't think that ever really materializes. In these trade markets, when you're doing a lot of analysis, and it's great to be efficient and, probabilistic about this player or that player, but ultimately you got to pull the trigger at some point. Either you do or you don't. And trades at the deadline are not the most efficient trades if you want to think in terms of value for value. And we understand that. We're trying to be better. Other teams are trying to be better for the future. We want to do it now. And so there's some inefficiencies, but we explored a lot of different things, some broader, some narrower, and this is kind of where we ended up, but we're happy with what transpired.
And then
Ken? I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, and then as you see how everything shook out in the NL, how do you feel you stack up to some of the other contending teams?
I mean, I've always felt good about this team before the deadline. I feel good still about this team. We still have a lead in the division. As I've said before, we need to play better than our current record. I think we can, and I expect us to. So I think we stack up, as I've said before, the whole thing is to get there, right? You win your division, you got a good shot. There's a lot of good teams in the National League. But the way that the game's structured is that, if you look at 3 teams, really look like an arms race this week in the NL West. And the reality is, we're probably only playing one of those teams in the postseason if we get there. So I think we have as good a shot as anybody. We just need to focus on playing well the rest of the way and getting into winning the division.
I would say if we had weaknesses in the first part of the first 100 games of the season, it was one, inconsistent starting pitching just because he had holes to fill every 3 or 4 days, and the second would be our offense against left-handed pitching. And we've certainly addressed one of those issues with Baez. And with respect to the pitching holes that we've had, we've got Carrasco pitching tonight. We've got Rich Hill, and while that might not be a Jacob deGrom or a Jose Berrios, we're comfortable with what we currently have as we move in those last 60 games.
Ken, now you're up.
Ken David off New York Post. Guys, just wondering, Baez's offensive profile, obviously he's not a plate discipline guy. Did that give you any reservations?
Anytime you look at a player, you look at their strengths and weaknesses, and you're trying to get players that do a lot more things to help you win. Does he have Brandon Nimmo's approach at the plate? Not necessarily, but he brings a lot of power. He brings elite defense, elite base running. So plays up the middle. I mean, there's a lot that he brings to the table. It's hard to acquire perfect players. I don't know how many there are in the game. So, yeah, he's gonna be aggressive. We know that, and there's gonna be nights that's gonna be tough for him against certain pitchers. But there's also gonna be nights where he's going to help us win games with his power and the things he can do in the field and on the bases.
And when you talk about energy, just wondering, he had the incident just this week with Garrett. I mean, incident's not the right word. Drama. When you see something like that, does that give you any pause, or do you feel like that's all good? Like that just.
Yeah, I mean, it seems, I don't know the whole history there. I know there is a history. It is kind of amusing that we are playing the Reds. When I talked to Javi, he's very excited to come to New York, which is another plus for him, is that he's someone that wanted to be here, wanted to come to New York, and that has some value in my mind, as someone that doesn't shy away from the spotlight. But he didn't know. He actually asked, "Who are we playing?" And I said, "We're playing your buddy's team." So he thought that, he kind of chuckled at that, and he's on his way, and he's eager to get going.
By the way, what's wrong with drama?
I'm not, there's a line, right? I'm not sure if that crossed
Right.
it. I'm honestly
Right.
not sure.
Yeah.
Disha in the center.
Hey guys, Disha Thosar for the New York Daily News. This is for either of you. At least it seems like a part of the fan base was expecting you guys to do more with the starting pitching, given the injuries and what we've seen so far in this season. I guess, what can you say to sort of quell those concerns?
Well, I understand. Fans always want the best for their teams. That's why they're, fans. That's why they're excited and care a lot. And this fan base cares a lot. And I'd much rather be working for a team where the fans are like that. And so there's always lofty expectations, and we have lofty expectations as well. But we also, as we've talked about a lot during this, this conversation we're having right now, that you can't control everything, and so you got to just put your best foot forward with what you can do. We felt like I've said before, we have a good team. I feel confidence in a lot of the guys we have. We've improved our depth quite a bit over the last week, and those were the opportunities that were there, and we took them. We can't force other teams to do things with us, so we did the best we could in that environment.
And what's your satisfaction level with the bullpen as it stands now, and how much were you focused on going on someone like Kimbrel or Hand toward the end of that process?
Yeah, we explored, as Andy said, we explored a lot of things that included bullpen options. I like our bullpen. We walked through it. We did a whole half a day probably just talking about our own bullpen amongst our group of scouts and analysts and other front office people. And we have a lot of good players. And when you talk about, again, sort of the position players, if you're bringing in this guy, how much of, is this an upgrade over this guy that's already here? Because we have some guys that are really talented and have performed, for the most part, very well over the season. So everything's relative to that. It wasn't, we don't feel like our bullpen has been this, we have 4 holes in the bullpen we need to fill, and so therefore it was obvious to go out and do that. But we were opportunistic and looking for, we understand that in the postseason, one way to improve our club would be to have, the best bullpen in the postseason. And I think we have the capability of having those guys because we have some elite arms on this team.
Tim, you're next.
Tim Britton with The Athletic. This is for Zach. Sandy mentioned that the prices didn't really come down this week like maybe usual. And a couple weeks ago you said, you guys were being patient. Was there any moment in the last couple of days where you had to maybe recalibrate what you thought it would take to acquire certain people and kind of change your plans along those lines?
No, there was never, you can't ever assume going in that the price is going to come down to something. The market's the market, and at some point, what you're trying to vet is this really the market for this player? Or, you get in this game of chicken where you think that there's no way they're going to get that. I can't think of a situation that happened this week where, if I felt like, we tried to lowball and then they had, calling their bluff and then they went and they had something else. That didn't happen. That's just not how it works. I think here's the level that we have, and, in order for you to beat this price, this is what it's going to take. And if it's something to talk about, you talk further, and if it's clearly way off from how you value that player, you move on. And there's a lot of quick conversations like that. And sometimes I found myself saying, wow, good for you guys. That's not, something that's going to work for us, and you feel fine about that and move on. That's typically how it goes. I don't have, you can't play that game. That's a dangerous game, and you usually wind up not doing anything if you're just waiting for everything to come down. players go off the board and you're left empty-handed. So that's not how we wanted to go.
And then for either of you, you've talked, in the offseason about building out the depth of your minor league system. Does a week like this kind of reiterate the importance of building, maybe more surplus in that area?
I think so. I think there's, what we've kind of alluded to before, where teams, you're at the mercy of how teams see your talent, and some teams they didn't feel like they could find that match, that fit for them. It's maybe some part of the farm system that they were talking about with other clubs they found to be better with some other teams than we did, and there's nothing we can really do. If they see a gap in talent, we can't force that. We can't do anything about it. So I think I've always known that the depth of your farm system is important, not only to be a feeder system to create a lot of big leaguers, but also for trades. And the more depth you have, the better positioned you are to make some deals. I think you saw some teams with some deep farm systems that were able to package multiple players to get the things they wanted to do that, the sellers just didn't see that opportunity with us at times. But, I'm confident that we're going to have a really good farm system going forward. It doesn't happen overnight. We have the buds of a really good farm system in my mind. We have some really good players, and we're going to continue to grow that.
I think
Lloyd in the middle.
I was just going to say the important thing is
I'm sorry, sir.
to keep in mind is that there are only two currencies in baseball. One is cash and one is talent. And what this deadline, I think, proved, at least in this case, that talent was more important than cash. And that goes to the whole philosophy of building through a farm system, which everybody says, everybody tries to do. And the question is, how do you go about doing it? And sometimes it requires you to say no when opportunities arise to move players who are 4 or 5 years away, but nonetheless have the potential to be outstanding major leaguers at some point.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lloyd.
Lloyd Carroll, Queens Chronicle. To borrow Ken's term, drama. Sandy, how would you compare 2015, that deadline with Yoenis Cespedes, with this year's 2021? Differences, similarities? I'm just curious your recollections.
Well, one of the similarities was that in 2015, we spent a lot of time on the last day trying to probe and determine whether we could get a player for less than the asking price. And in some ways, we've done the same thing over the last couple of days. I mean, that's how you probe the market. That's how you define it. That's how you begin to understand it and then feel comfortable about making a trade when you kind of fully understand the market. I think what Zach and others did over the last 4 or 5 days, it's like buying a house. You look at 100 of them, and then on 101, you make a decision in 5 minutes. And in some ways, that's what you have to do. You got to get comfortable with what you're prepared to do, and it takes some period of time to do that. And that's why these deals happen kind of at the last minute. People, aside from the fact that most decisions are made at a deadline, I think that 4 or 5 day period, maybe even back to the All-Star break, is necessary to figure out where this market is going. But even with all that background, surprising things happen, and you have to adjust. When somebody makes a deal and trades their first and second best prospects for somebody with pretty limited control, maybe not a rental, but limited control, you have to take that into account. That's where things are going. So with respect to 15, we did a lot of probing the last day to try and get the price down, and finally we just said, we're going to do this. It was a similar approach this year. We had a number of different things that try, and some weren't even possible, but those that were possible, we tried to figure out, okay, where's the landing spot, and to trade a player like Crow Armstrong, you got to get comfortable in it, and sometimes it takes a little while to do that.
Rich, over on the right.
Rich Catino, ESPN Radio. This question is for either of you. Obviously, in the short term, he's going to play shortstop. But once Lindor returns, he then goes to another position, more likely second base. What does that do depth-wise to the third base position? Is it more of McNeil's spot? Is it JD's spot? Is it a combination? Have you guys thought about that at all?
Yeah, I mean, as I said before, we have time to kind of talk through that as a group with Louis and his staff. And the thing that I like about our roster is there are some guys that have played around the diamond. You know, McNeil's played around the diamond. JD's played a little bit, you know, some outfield. So there's time to figure those things out, and we have some versatility. So I think that alone will allow us to kind of find the best spots for everybody. And it's not about just what's the best spot for one player, it's the whole team, and how do we fit, you know, defensively, and you know, how does this work together, how do the pieces fit.
Believe that is it. Everybody good? Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Zach, and thank you, Sandy.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Nice to be back in one spot for a press conference.